Morning, everybody. We have quorum. Welcome to members of the committee, to other members of council in attendance, and of course, members of the public and staff. For those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are on the agenda and what's coming up next. You can always follow the agenda in real time on your tablet, computer, smartphone, at toronto.ca/council. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on as the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the April 25th, 2019 meeting? Councillor McKelvey, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, why don't we run through the agenda? Item 1, contract award of negotiable request for proposal number 4204-195019 for construction of water mains and amendments to purchase orders number 6045918, 6046025 for engineering services for detailed design. I think the title of that's going to be longer than the debate. Does anyone want to hold that? Move it. Moved by Councillor McKelvey. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item number 2, amendment to purchase order 6025318 for Headworks and odor control upgrades at Highland Creek Treatment Plant with AECOM Canada Limited. Moved by Councillor McKelvey. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item 3, we have a deputant, so we will hold that item. Item number 4, contract award for tender call number 542019 for rehabilitation of 4 bridges over the Don Valley Parkway. You'll move it? Moved by Councillor Cole. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 5.5, School Crossing Guard Program Update and Results of the Request for Proposal 914819-0114 for provision of school crossing guard services. I'm actually glad someone's holding that one. 5.5 is held. .6, approving access to fire halls, converting existing parking prohibitions in the vicinity of fire halls to stopping prohibitions. Councillor Layton is moving the staff recommendations. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 5.7, accessibility review, on-street bikeway design guidelines. You have to hold that. There was something. Staff don't want to do this again.
So it's referred to transportation services, I think is what they were talking about.
Does someone want to move a refer? We just want to, I think we want, let's hold it down. We want to refer it to the General Manager of Transportation. Yeah, we'll hold that. 5.9, oh, sorry, 5.8, Credit Valley, Toronto. Yes, held by Councillor McKelvey. 5.9 is, there's a deputant, so we will hold that. 5, is that a cell phone? Oh my gosh. 5.10, management of solid waste contracts under transition to full extended producer responsibility model with a confidential attachment.
Sorry, I need to hold that one down. And the next one.
10 held by Councillor Layton And number 11, Disco Road Organics Processing Facility, Future Operations and Maintenance Agreement Amendment.
Can I distribute these two new items? I can distribute yours, Counselor, and mine on the tablets. It's from staff. Where can I
So there's two new items, two walk-on items that have not been distributed. Maybe I can get consent for them anyway. Sanofi Pasteur Ravine Stewardess Initiative and Proposal. All those in favor, just on adding it to the agenda? Carried. And this is from Councillor Minnan-Wong. Closure of Don Valley Parkway ramps at Eglinton Avenue East. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And that, I believe, sets the agenda for today. Are there any? That's it? Okay, we're good to go. We're starting off with item 3, Frank Moore. Truth or votes?
No, we're good. We're good. The whole season is now 1 and 2 Counselor. And if Ruth doesn't know, we're still good.
Thank you very much for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Ready to go? The microphone on, yeah? Good morning, committee members, and a special hello to Councillor Jennifer McKelvey, who is our elected member for Ward 25. My name is Frank Moyer. I live in Highland Creek, and for the past 10 years, I've been the co-chair of the Highland Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant Neighbourhood Liaison Committee, known as NLC. I'm here today to inform you that the NLC supports the Chief Engineer's recommendation that the contract for the supply and installation of the new fluidized bed incinerators and emission control equipment for the Highland Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant be awarded to Suez Water Technologies and Solutions Canada. This is the culmination of the process that was initiated in 2002 when the new City of Toronto commissioned a biosolids and residuals master plan to provide direction on the future management of biosolids and water residuals generated by the city's treatment plants to the year 2025. In 2017, Council approved the Highland Creek Biosolids Class Environmental Assessment that identified and evaluated in detail the possible options for the best disposal method for the Highland Creek biosolids. In addition to environmental and financial studies, the EA included a health impact assessment conducted under the guidance of the staff from the Toronto Public Health Unit, and an active program of public consultation. The 3 most promising alternatives were evaluated considering all 4 of the above criteria. The highest scoring alternative was for the on-site incineration using fluidized bed technology with off-site ash disposal. The majority of the members of NLC supported this recommendation, as did all 5 local community associations. The incinerator option had acceptable health impacts, significantly lower capital and 25-year life cycle costs, and most importantly, had much less environmental impact on the residential neighborhoods that surround the plant. The existing incinerators are now more than 40 years old and need to be replaced as soon as possible. We are pleased to see that the city is proceeding expeditiously to implement the required biosolids disposal improvements at the plant. In conclusion, I would like to recognize the significant contributions made by our local councillors, past and present, namely the late Ron Moser, Jim Hart, Paul Ainsley, and most of all, Jennifer McKelvey, who until recently was an active member not only of the NLC committee, but also CCRA and SCRO. They all helped us get where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just my final sentence. Please approve the award of the incinerator contract to Suez as recommended by staff.
Yes, no, we figured that was your message. Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in.
Let's bring it into committee. Questions for staff? Did I see your hand go up, Councillor Layton?
Pardon me?
Did I see your hand go up?
No.
Any speakers? Okay. Okay, who wants to move the recommendations? Councillor McKelvey, obviously you're a local hero, so you might as well. All those in favor of the recommendations before us? Opposed? That is carried. Councillor Cole, I believe you held 5.5 down, school crossing guard program? Yes.
Delayed. Can we could do this crossing guard thing next. But I have an interest in item 1 and item 4, which were released. And I was wondering if we could, hold those down, because I had some questions.
Mr. Chair,
You want to reopen?
I'll move to reopen those 2 items for council.
Okay, there's a motion to reopen. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So you've asked for item 1.
Yeah,
On a point of order, we may need some staff to get back.
well,
here
I
on one
think
of those items.
the crossing guard thing will,
Oh, yes,
there's enough
that'll take
time.
long enough.
because I think that's an interesting,
Sorry, it was 1 and,
1 and 4. 4 was released, I think.
okay, so we'll consider those 2 items back on the floor for
Thank
debate.
you, Mr. Chair.
So why don't we deal with crossing guard, and then we'll go back to item 1?
Also, Mr. Chair, I dropped an item about road closures. Was that?
Is that your walk-on item?
Yes,
Yeah, it's, we've added it to the agenda.
okay.
Yes, walk-on. Councillor Cole, you held the item down. Questions for staff?
Yes, in terms of item IE 5.5, the staff is behind me, I think, is it? Sorry for my back, Mr. Chairman.
Maybe you need a
Yes.
mirror. though.
I think this is a good opportunity to give us a bit of an update on the status of our crossing guard program. I know in the past, the Toronto Police Services has operated and managed the crossing guard program. Where are we at with the transition of the crossing guard program over to the City of Toronto Transportation?
Through the chair, I'll start with that, and if there's some additional details, I might look to staff to fill in. So you're correct in, I think the crossing guard program has been owned and operated by the police since 1947, and as part of the transformational task force work that was done and brought to council in 2018, the recommendation was to ensure that police were doing core policing services, and so a couple of programs were proposed as moving to the public service to deliver, and one of them was the crossing guards. The proposal was to move it to transportation, where we have been working with the police to figure out the best way to deliver those services. In the 2018-19 school year, the commitment from transportation was to deliver the backfill portion of that service, meaning that when a guard did not show up at a scheduled time or location, previously the police would send an officer to backfill that location, and that was not only costly, but it was also problematic in terms of taking police away from their core duties. And so what they asked us to do was to figure out a way to deliver that backfill service in 2018-19, which we did, and using sort of best available information on how to prepare to staff that through a consultant contract, we found out that the number of backfills required to keep the program whole was almost 100 a day. And so we've had some challenges in 2018 and 19 ramping up to be able to deliver that backfill service. but we have been able to do that, and at this point, we're at almost between 80 and 100% fill on a daily basis. Concurrently with the 18-19 backfill contract, Transportation Services was also working with our partners in purchasing and in police to develop a request for proposal for the broader delivery of the Crossing Guard program as part of Vision Zero and as a school safety initiative. And so that RFP was released in April, I believe, and we received the bids from 4 companies, 2 of which we are recommending through this report to move forward, and that would allow us to begin servicing the Crossing Guard program under Transportation Services in the fall of this year.
In terms of the backfill program, so on an average day, how many crossing guards essentially fail to show up?
On an average day, approximately 100 guards. Now, some of that is day of, so I would say approximately 30 to 40 of those are day of fills where people weren't able to show up for their shift. Others were because people had retired, so a permanent guard might have retired, or a new location might have been warranted and moved forward without a permanent guard to fill it. Because when the police have to backfill those locations, they have to go out and try to hire somebody and do background checks and all of those pieces. So it does take some time to get a permanent guard in place. In the intervening time, we used our backfill contractor to fill those positions.
So are we, at this point in time, still using police officers to backfill?
Through the chair, we are not, and we have not been since September of this year. So we took over the backfill portion of the program in September of 2018.
Yeah, because I guess those police officers were taken off another duty, or were they paid duty officers at $50 an hour that went into backfill?
My understanding is they were on regular shift and were deployed off regular shift, regular duties to do the backfill.
Okay, so they're no longer doing that back. So where do you get the, at present time, where do you get the backfill guards to come in when there's a failure to show?
We are currently working with 3 vendors. One vendor that has mostly been providing day of backfills that we started with in September of 2018, and 2 additional vendors that we brought on in 2019 at the beginning of the year, starting after the winter break, in order to make sure that we were able to backfill locations that were permanent in nature. So we were required to put permanent guards in places where they were not, where they were either new or had retired posts.
In terms of the numbers, how many crossing guards are deployed in the city of Toronto right now? 700 or something?
Right now, there are 660 guards, and in September, there will be 710.
How does this compare in numbers to what existed, 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Any ballpark figures?
5 years ago. We know that in September of 2018, there were 610 guards. And so in the 2018-19 school year alone, there were 100 locations that were added. Some through warrants that, there's been a pent-up demand, I think, for crossing guards, and so a number of warrants that had been put forward previously were approved, and so there were locations that were added in the 2018-19 school year, and that's why the program has become so large. I don't have the numbers for 5 years ago as to how many guards were added year over year previously. Sorry.
But as you said, the number is increasing.
The number is increasing, and in part, I believe the number is increasing because the process by which the warrants requests came into police did not have as much structure around it as we now. So Transportation Services has taken over the warrant process as of April 1st, and so we've created a bit more structure around the process of applying for a new crossing guard location, including requirement of either the local councillor or the principal to be involved in that warrant. which was not the case previously. So anybody could have put in a warrant request for a crossing guard, and they would have been reviewed by the police. So
That
I
was
think
your last question, Councillor Cole.
Okay.
Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong?
Yeah, I just want to go back. How many locations do we have for crossing guards? I'm less in, staff's one thing, but the more interesting.
640, it's going to 710.
Sorry,
Through the chair, there's.
I think he can get a job in your office because he seems to want to
Councillor
answer your
Peruzza,
questions
did you
for
want, did you have questions for staff?
There are 660 in place right now,
660 in place.
and then in September, there will be 710 locations approved.
And so they're now 660, and from the 660, has that number increased?
Since September.
660 number, what was it?
It was 610 in September of 2018.
610 in 2018. Now we're increasing 100 locations.
This year, and I think in part that's because a number of warrants were processed this year, and so a number of locations were approved this year.
Has the warrant process changed over the last little while?
It has changed as of April 1st. Now it's with Transportation Services.
No, sorry, the evaluation process. Has it become easier to get a crossing guard?
The evaluation process hadn't changed up until April 1st of 2019 when Transportation Services took it over. So prior to that, it was anybody could apply for a guard. They would go through a warrant process that police would evaluate. And if you're interested, I think you know more about the process, so maybe you could answer.
Yeah, so through the chair, the previous process under the police, anyone could basically request a school crossing guard, putting an email through to the chief of police. Following that, the police were basically obligated to undertake the review. The review would basically look at gaps in traffic at the specific location of crossing. If it is approved, then the police would basically go through the process of trying to see if they could find an individual to fill that position right away. And so from that perspective, what we're looking at from the data in the past, it appears that the program was growing at a rate of 40 to 50 new guard locations per year. As the general manager indicated, as of April 1st of this year, Transportation Services basically took over that program, and we basically provided a lot more structure to the program, such that now, for example, anyone who's requesting a crossing guard, whether it's a parent or whomever, has to also seek approval from the local councillor and the principal, or the principal as well too, before we even initiate the investigation into whether or not a school crossing guard should go at that location. Subsequent to that, we would undertake a gap acceptance analysis. We're actually looking at using the latest process that came from the Ontario Traffic Councils, where they got all the municipalities, the school crossing guard programs together, and established a new process that has a little bit more of an urban focus with respect to that lens. Subsequent to that, we would then basically evaluate whether or not there's sort of an immediate need to fill the crossing guard, if there's like an urgent situation, or if it's, the crossing guard is warranted at the location, but we would basically ensure, given the budget and sort of our control measures on the budget, that it would go on to the next cycle. So for example, if someone's requesting a crossing guard.
I've got a sufficient.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Did we ever say no?
Yeah, we can.
Do we ever say no? Yeah, yes.
Oh, yes, yeah, I was just getting to that. So again, if there was a location that was not deemed warranted, this is the benefit of the program coming under Transportation Services. We would be able to look at the neighborhood from a holistic perspective and see whether or not there are other safety improvements that could be implemented that would mitigate the need for a school crossing guard.
How much does a crossing cost at a school in a year?
35,000. Through the chair.
At one school, how much does it cost the city to run a crossing guard?
Through the chair, the guards are not specified to schools, they're at intersections, so
Fair
it's
enough. At an
$35,000.
intersection,
$35,000 a year per location.
have we ever looked into the idea of cost sharing with the TDSB?
Through the chair, we've never done the program before, so we have not looked into that. We were directed to take the program over from police, and so that's what we've been working on, that model.
And what was the program before, and how much of an increase are you asking for now, today?
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so through the chair, under the police, they had reported that they were operating the program at, I believe it was 10
12?
million, sorry, get the exact figure here. Yeah, approximately $10 million per year.
And now what's it
However,
coming
that cost did not include the cost of backfilling the positions with uniformed police officers. It also didn't include the cost of their HR, their payroll, all their administrative functions, management of the team. That was the best information they had at the time that they were able to provide to us.
And what are you looking from us for approval from today?
So through the chair, we're looking for roughly $24 million per year to operate the program.
And where are you
And that,
getting
and that cost basically is all inclusive of
That's-
contracted approach.
That's your last question.
Okay, I'm going to come back. I'd like a second round on this one because at 14, over 100% jump's a big deal.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of money here. Any other questions for staff? I have a few. Councillor Perusa?
Just take us through the life of a crossing guard. How many hours a day would a crossing guard typically work?
Yeah, so through the chair, crossing guard typically works or is required to be on there anywhere from 3 to 3.5 hours a day. I guess the issue is because they'll go to a site in the morning, then they have a couple hours break in between, then they have to go back to that site in the and at lunchtime, a couple hours break, and then back to the site in the afternoon. So essentially, we're asking them to commit their entire day, but from a compensation perspective, we're looking at just typically the 3 hours.
So we pay typically 3 hours a day to a crossing guard.
Through the chair, it's actually about 4 hours per day.
4 hours?
Yeah, to take into consideration, within the estimate that we provided, to take into consideration the travel time in between shifts.
So 4 hours. And we equip them, obviously, right? We give them that flak jacket that they wear, the hat, and the stop sign, right?
Exactly. Through the chair, so equipment costs are included within that, which would be the vest, you're correct, as well as the whistle, as well as the stop paddle.
So
the
so
contract
vest,
wouldn't do that.
whistle, hat, and the stop sign, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. Nothing else?
Yeah, through the chair, there are other PPEs that would be added as well, too. Things like raincoats or snow gear, this kind of thing, or safety boots, depending.
So we provide safety boots to all of them?
Yeah. Through the chair, with the contracted model, that depends. It's really the responsibility of the vendor going forward. We basically stipulated those requirements within the RFP contract, that depending on the circumstances of the particular site, the vendor is basically on the hook to provide whatever PPEs are actually necessary and required for the staff.
Which is protective equipment, which
Okay,
is,
now typically, like a crossing guard, you see mostly like older folks. Are they typically like retired people?
through the chair, I think there's lots of different people who decide they want to be crossing guards. I don't have the percentages, but we often find that a lot of retired folks are doing this to supplement income. There's also lots of newcomers. We've been working with our partners in tests to find out how we can make this opportunity more attractive to people and let them know what the opportunity is in their community.
Precisely, that was going to be my next question, because, so the police, the police were paying the crossing guards how much per hour?
$14 an hour.
Through the chair, $14 an hour.
So they were basically paying the minimum wage for the 4 hours. And what are we going to be paying the security?
So we've done an analysis, and again, as Roger mentioned, the Ontario Traffic Council has done, in 2018, they released best practices related to crossing guards, and they have recommended that part of the way to get more compliance of people actually showing up for those 3 shifts is to pay them certainly closer to $17 an hour. And so the contractor will make the determination ultimately of that cost, but it will certainly be above $16.97 an hour.
And in terms of how and where they're recruited from, is there any consideration being given to sort of recruiting people locally, like from given neighborhoods that reflect those neighborhoods?
Yeah, so through the chair, absolutely. With the program starting in September of this year, there's a need for 710 crossing guard locations, as we identified. From the latest records we have from the police, they indicated that there's about 600 crossing guards in the current complement, not including spares. So number one, it's going to behoove the vendor that it's in their best interest that they basically try to rehire as many of the existing crossing guards as possible. That being said, they still have a shortfall of 110 additional crossing guards that they're going to be looking to fill. And most certainly they'll be focusing on trying to get people who live, relatively speaking, within the same neighborhood.
And in terms of I guess let's call them the qualifications that you're looking for, what would a crossing guard typically need to, like, is there like a test of sorts? Do
so
you
through
need
the
to
chair-
speak English? You need to, I don't know, what would you be looking for in a crossing guard?
Yeah, so through the chair, there's a number of guidelines and requirements that the police had for the school crossing guards, and we essentially just adopted that, and it included those requirements within the RFP contract itself.
Can you,
So that would include
can you
things-
speak to a few of those, just to
Exactly.
understand them a little better?
They've got to have,
That's your last
eyesight.
question.
Yeah,
What?
sorry. Their eyesight has to be good. They've got to be physically capable and mobile. One of the most important things is they have to go through the police vulnerability sector checking as well, too, to make sure that they don't have criminal records, this kind of thing. But there's a number of requirements that are stipulated, by the police that we basically just adopted.
Who does the training for them?
So through the chair, within this contract, it's the responsibility of the vendor to provide the training. However, we've got an ongoing relationship with Toronto Police Service where they've been providing assistance in sort of a train-the-trainer type setup. So even over the past year, essentially what had happened was the police would bring the vendor in, train up their supervisors, and then those supervisors would then be responsible for ongoing training from that point forward.
But it was,
Okay,
it's so
Councillor
essentially,
Peruzza, you're well over 5 minutes. I think Deputy Mayor Minawong has asked for a second round, which is fine. Anyone else, questions for staff? Haven't you had your go? I'm going to do first. So just back to a point you mentioned earlier about the costs of last-minute fill-ins for crossing guards who don't show up. By the time someone realizes that a crossing guard is not going to show up and a call is placed to, whether it's police services or some kind of replacement pool, wouldn't you think by the time the replacement got there, the kids are all gone, they're either gone home or they're into the school, it's just too late? You're talking about a very short window that there's intensity, traffic intensity at these sites.
So we've been tracking the same-day fill requests, as you described, those that come in the evening before or the day of. Typically, they get filled by the lunch shift. So very often there won't be a guard present that morning unless if we get it the night before, then often we're able to get a guard there in the morning. Otherwise, they would be filled by the lunch shift.
I see. So when it comes to delegated authority, are these community councils that will have the final word on who gets a traffic guard? Will the
Yeah.
reports go to community council? And if the crossing guard is on a TTC route, does it have to come to full council?
So our proposal is, since it's a citywide issue, that we would bring it back to this committee and really talk if there were policy changes that were required or other kind of actions that were required related to contracting. Otherwise, we would bring it through the budget if we had an increase and required an increase in dollar amount. We'd bring it through the budget process.
So, okay, so a principal and the local councillor wants a crossing guard. They bring a motion to community council for staff to study it. The warrants come back to where? Community council here?
So the warrant would be initiated by someone. It could be initiated by a counselor's office. It could be initiated by a principal. It could be initiated by a member of the public who had some approval either from the local counselor or the principal. And we would not accept the warrant unless there was concurrence from either the local counselor or the principal that it was, they were supportive of that proposal. And then we would do the warrant review post that approval.
The warrants are not similar in technical aspect, but similar in study to a stop sign where staff would report back with their results?
The process of a school crossing guard under transportation is part of Vision Zero. It's a school safety initiative. And so the purpose of having a crossing guard is to ensure that at locations where there are higher volumes of students crossing and perhaps complicated traffic movements that we have somebody there to do active traffic management at the intersection. And so the warrant would be the approval. If they are approved through the warrant process, again, we tried to put the local counselor and the principal at the front end of that process in saying we would support a proposal here, and then we would move forward and we would respond back to the applicant with the results of that warrant review. And of course, we would also communicate that back to the counselor and the principal.
Does it have to be adopted by community council or adopted by city council, or it's just, no?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. It's my understanding from my school board days that the principal of the school is responsible for the safe, I guess, delivery of students and departure of students in the morning. They're the ones who are really responsible, and you've mentioned them in passing as very engaged in this process. Is it correct to assume that at the end of the day, the principal is responsible for the safe dropping off and picking up of students at their school?
So I would assume that is true. Where we find often crossing guard locations is not directly in front of the schools, so very often they're, on the arterials that are perhaps in the community safety zone, kind of a little bit of a larger net cast there, as well as on school walk routes. So they may not be immediately at the, within the school zone. In terms of who's ultimately responsible for the safety of the students, I would assume the principals have a significant role and probably a stated role in that, but I think transportation also has a role to play in ensuring that students who choose to walk to school are able to cross those intersections safely and expeditiously.
Okay, thank you very much. A second round has been requested. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yes, I have questions of the Toronto Police Service, and I see the CFO there, so I was wondering if he might be able to answer some questions for us. So, through you, Mr. Chair, the Transportation Services has given us some has used some very strong language in saying that the Transformational Task Force, where the transfer of the crossing guard program was supposed to be net neutral, is hardly anything but that. And I was wondering what the Toronto Police Services agrees with the comments that that the services that were transferred are far more significant than what was than what was anticipated.
So through you, Mr. Chair, what I will say is that from when we're still doing the program now, the number of sites has increased. Certainly, as transportation staff have indicated, backfills under the contract would be 100% backfills, as opposed to us putting a police officer there whenever we can to actually backfill. So there was a number of things that changed during that period of time, the number of sites, the number of hours that these school crossing guards will be paid, the rate that they will be paid at, and I think that all that contributed to a significantly higher cost.
Does that add up to an additional $13 million? Did you include in your assessment the cost of administration, the cost of all the extra staff that you needed? Was that included in your program?
So we actually transferred $7.5 million to the Transportation Services Division based on $6.5 million, which is direct cost to us for paying the school crossing guards. These are 2018 numbers. As well as about $1 million in what we call administrative. What we have is in divisions, we have police officers, accommodated officers who might be doing this role as well as other roles. And we have some dedicated civilian people that also provide that administrative role. And so we basically split and shared about $1 million of that cost and transferred it over to transportation so they could continue to provide or get some relief in terms of the administration that was required. Then it was decided that they would go out to the market, and then this is now the I guess, results of what the market basically says it will cost to do this program.
In your financial documents, how much do your documents show that the program cost?
When you take everything into account in terms of direct costs, equipment, which I would say
you said direct costs, and that, so I'm,
And there's overheads as well. There's overheads as well. I would say it's probably around, with everything in, about $9 to $9.5 million.
your direct and indirect costs.
Yeah, we've got, like, in other words, the hiring process, the background process, taking into account the opportunity cost of police officers having to do school crossing duties as opposed to actually answering calls. All of that probably adds up to about, like I said, $9 to $9.5 million.
Okay, and so so you disagree with the arrangement where I think they said the previous costs were $12 million.
I don't know what that $12
Do you
million
have a chance to review this report?
I've looked at it this morning very quickly. I didn't see exactly what the $12 million included. All I can tell you is that we transferred 7.5, and that was approved by City Council.
And there are 100 more, so let's say it's $12 million. They said here that they have 100 more crossing guard locations. So that would leave 12 million from, what is it, 24 million here? So that would mean that 100 more locations cost an additional $12 million. I think that's a bit of a stretch, wouldn't you?
It's quite the increase.
So there seems to be some disagreement between the Toronto Police Services and,
I don't think there's a disagreement. I think what's happened is that we've transferred the program to transportation and given them our best estimate in terms of what that program costs to run the program in-house with police officers and civilian staff who are doing that job part-time. You are now asking the market to basically come in and vendors to say, how much will it cost to run the program based on a number of additional sites, based on increased number of hours, an increased rate in the pay, and backfills, and all of that. And they have to administer the program and make a profit. So all of that adds up. And certainly I was surprised, I'll be very honest with you. I think most people were with the cost, but that's what the market has said.
so, Mr. Chairman, I have a question of the General Manager of Transportation Services, and it's pretty,
So we should keep the work in-house, forget the
sorry,
market.
my question is this: so would you agree that this program could be run with a modest salary increase in those, do you think you could run that for anything around? He says it only costs $7-8 million to run. Would you agree with that analysis? And could you, with the additional salary increases in administration, run it for modestly more? Or would you disagree with the comments that were made by the Toronto Police Services?
Well, through the chair, so we did an analysis of what it would cost to run in-house for transportation, going from no management and oversight of crossing guards to what we thought was a reasonable balance of one supervisor for 20 guards to be able to ensure that they showed up and that they had that support. And in order to do that at the 710 permanent locations, we came up with a figure of $25.1 million to run that program in-house annually. So certainly there'd be some bandwidth within that number with regard to how many, you could do 30 to 1 in terms of the supervisor to guards. You could change that ratio. But I don't have any argument in terms of what police costs were coming over to us. I just think that the program, in order to get consistent fills and to have 100% delivery, which is, I believe, what the community expects, given that when we don't have crossing guards at locations, we get a pretty hearty earful from folks about them not showing up, that we wanted to make sure that we delivered a service that was 100% fill and that had the appropriate level of oversight to deliver.
Yeah, but it doesn't cost over $10 million to get that total fill that you're looking for, does it?
Well, I think it's certainly a cost component as well as the salary is a cost.
It's not
Well,
$13 million, is it?
in addition to the salary, I think it was, what, did we have that in the report? What was the breakdown
Gosh.
of the?
Okay, so I think,
That's your last question. I hope you don't want to go to a third round. Thank you. We're on a second round. Councillor Cole?
Just in terms of the recruitment and retention of these crossing guards, so their work hours are quite strange, aren't they? Could you just give us the outline of their work hours?
So through the chair, in terms of their work hours, again, typically it could be an hour to an hour and a half per shift, and they would have to do 3 shifts a day. So essentially, it's anywhere from 3 to 3.5, 4 hours a day. And again, as mentioned, they're essentially committed to the entire day because you really can't do anything in between shifts. But the typical compensation is just the 3 hours.
Yeah, so basically, they go in the morning for, between, I guess, 8 and 9, and then they have to go home wherever they go, and then they come back at noon till 1, and then they go home, and then they come back from 3 to 4. How can a person really be recruited when they're working these really unusual hours and they can't get a second job? So how is the recruitment challenge going?
Well, I think the recruitment, through the chair, I think the recruitment challenge is significant, and I think the cost of doing payroll and administration to manage a guard program of this size is also quite significant because, as you rightfully pointed out, it can be difficult to manage that schedule, and it can be difficult to recruit people into those positions, as well as them having to have some component of background checks in order to be able to do the work. And so retention is challenging, and it's one of the reasons why the Ontario Traffic Council indicated that the cost per hour of a guard salary should be closer to something that would encourage retention and people to be able to fill those positions as opposed to having a constant series of backfills, which we, of course, experienced this year and which the police have always experienced. And again, they've had to deploy officers to do that backfill in order to ensure the safety of the school children.
So the $14 an hour is not going to attract people to this very unusual shift work?
Through the chair, again, we've been very involved with our partners in Fair Wage, and we've been very involved with looking at best practices in the province, and all of that has led us to this floor of $16.97 an hour as the base. And we think that it's probably a little higher than that, but again, it would be up to the contractor to set those rates.
And in terms of the recruitment of these crossing guards, as Councillor Peruzza mentioned, they seem to be retired people or mature people. I rarely see young people as crossing. I did see one at, where did I see one? In Harvard and near Central Tech there. I saw a young person. I said, wow, a younger generation crossing guard. Is there any attempt to recruit newcomers, students, to become crossing guards rather than just going to the traditional retirement, the gray pool?
Yeah, through the chair, absolutely. In fact, we've been working very closely with, in terms of the poverty reduction strategy, that this program was, this particular project was basically selected as a pilot for one of their programs to specifically help facilitate just that.
So can we potentially do some, through the contractor that we're thinking of employing here, can we do this outreach to the diverse community, the newcomer community who are looking for work before they, get full-time employment? Is there potential to reach out to these underemployed, segments of our society that they might be able to take on this, as I said, it's very unusual shift work, but it would pay $16-17 an hour.
Yeah. So through the chair, absolutely. We are going to be engaging the 2 vendors that we're recommending, specifically in those discussions, and basically to try and place that sort of emphasis and focus in terms of their hiring and recruitment.
I would also add that our partners at TESS here at the city we've been working with them over the course of this year to help to
With who?
Toronto Employment Services. I'm not getting the acronyms all exactly right because I always just refer to them as TESS, but Pat Wilcox and her team Toronto Employment Services and Social Services, thank you, the former Deputy City Manager, DiGeronimo. They have been working with us on recruitment strategies, especially targeting newcomers and folks who may be in communities, people maybe parents who are home with children much of the day, but maybe in their community and able to do that kind of work. So we've been looking to expand some of the options around recruitment strategies for new guards, because we believe that there will still be a consistent need to recruit new guards into this program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Councillor Perusa.
I want to better understand this just a little bit. So even with the wage increase going to somewhere between $16 and $17 an hour, you mentioned earlier that a guard costs us about $35,000 a year, a location, correct?
Through the chair, correct. That's assuming the contracted model.
Okay. So $35,000 a year. They work, we pay them 4 hours a day. At best, I come up with a number somewhere between, so what does a actual guard, what will a guard who shows up every day for work, for a typical year, will they earn?
Actually, sorry, through the chair, just to correct in terms of that, the value that we quoted, that includes basically all the management, all the oversight.
Correct, but I just want to understand the breakdown, okay?
Right. So
What does a guard typically earn in a year? Like if he shows up every day?
Yeah, so for a crossing guard through the contracted model, roughly about $19,000 a year.
I come up with around 14,000. How do you get 19,000? How many weeks a year do they work?
Through the chair, that's also taking into consideration travel allowance and other benefits.
So travel allowance, so someone who shows up every day will fill in a T4 for his or her crossing guard duties at around $19,000 a year.
Through the chair, correct.
So between 19,000 and 35,000, there's a.
Oh, sorry. Correct.
Sorry, the amount that we calculated was actually $13,300 a year.
Right, that's the number I was getting, but I was getting 13,600. I was being a little more generous, right? Okay, so the difference between 13,000 and 35,000 is basically about $21,000, $22,000 a year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, jump in and.
the rest of the money, I'm assuming, is all administration?
Through
so,
you, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to clarify the number provided. There's a difference between the salary that individual will earn or the hourly wage and the employer burden. As an employer,
Right.
It's not just the salary, it is also then the additional taxes as an employer, EI premiums, et cetera. So that number that was quoted would be what the employer burden would be on top of the salary component.
Through the chair, I would also add that one of the components that we were asking for was some assurance that guards actually showed up during the day. There's lots of extremely dedicated guards who show up without fail, rain or shine, and then there's certainly some that may or may not. And we found with the backfill and our contracted services, we were sending our staff out to audit locations and make sure that people were showing up. So in the contracted model, again, in order to deliver it, we've asked that the contractor provide some assurance of that. And so that also includes some GPS tracking and other pieces so that their guards can confirm that they're on site for the hours that we're paying them for, et cetera. So there are, as Lou mentioned, there are some additional components that that $35,000 or $31,000 per location is an all-in cost.
There's no other way to do this where we get the gap between the actual cost of a crossing guard and the program, a little more in line. It sounds a bit outlandish to me in terms of, what someone actually makes on the ground and what it costs us to deliver the program. The number just doesn't work.
Through the chair, we did explore an in-house model with all the requirements that we articulated. I don't think our assumptions are out of line in terms of wanting to have 100% backfill at those locations. I think that's what's expected of the program. So certainly, if you were to have somewhat less than that, I think one of the challenges with running a crossing guard program is that you have, again, a lot of very hardworking people on this strange shift model, and so you want them to show up and you want it to be a priority. And one of the ways that the Ontario Traffic Council has recommended to do that is to pay them a reasonable rate in order to incentivize that behavior. And then on the other side of it, we would have to have some kind of way to ensure that guards were at the locations they were supposed to be at. And so we would have to build that into the model as well.
Councillor Perusa,
Have we
that
ever
was your
thought-
last question.
Last question. Have we ever thought of like working with local schools to deliver the program through them? Wouldn't they be in a much better position to be able to sort of, eliminate a lot of that overhead and a lot of that administrative
So through the Transformational Task Force, we were mandated to take this program on, certainly working with the schools. I don't have experience as per se here. School boards have lots and lots of things on their plate as well, and so taking on the management of a crossing guard program is also a huge challenge for them. So it's while it may be aligned certainly with their mandate of providing safety to students getting to school, in terms of the actual administration of such a program, I think they would find it even more of a burden.
They get their supply teachers in, they
Councillor
got
Perusa,
long
you're
lists of
well
them, they get
over,
them in all the time.
well
Like,
over
they
the
have no problem with
five
that.
minutes, and you don't want to hand this over to local schools, is my commentary on that. Any other questions for staff? I just have a couple. Now, the number I jotted down was it's in the report, 710 locations for September. Is that?
Through you, that is correct.
So with approximately 600 TDSB schools and 200 Catholic board schools, you're at about 800. Now those are schools, not locations. So it's actually less than that. So let's say it's 750. We're pretty well at every publicly funded school in the city. Would you?
Crossing guards are not assigned to schools, they are at locations, and some locations may have multiple crossing guards assigned based on the intersections in the vicinity. So there are some schools that have in their vicinity as many as 5 guard locations, that's my understanding.
So the traffic guard, the crossing guards go to, at the request of schools and the local counselor, and are responsible for the safe crossing of school-aged children. So we can say that their school locations are really the primary sort of catchment area.
There just may be sited at multiple intersections in that catchment area.
So do we go beyond schools? Do we do any institutions? Do we do any community centers, places of worship, private schools? Private schools are covered under Vision
Some
Zero.
Hebrew schools, evidently, certainly the Catholic School Board schools, some private schools, yes, but no other institutions.
Okay. All right, that's it for questions. Speakers, Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank staff for their work on this. I know it hasn't been an easy transformation from the police, as everybody thought it would just be the reallocation of $7 or $9 million over to transportation, we would do it. But I think it's obvious this is a very challenging and complex file that we've transferred over to our transportation department. And it is going to continue to be that in terms of providing the service and the financing of this program, because the demand is never-ending, given the heightened concern parents and communities have about safety around schools, given the Vision Zero initiative, where we're trying to make our streets safer. And so it is really a challenge. I would think that we have to perhaps look at perhaps finding out whether other municipalities or school boards or do any cost sharing with the local city services on this. At least if we could just maybe find that out going forward. Are there any models where there is some cost sharing, or are there other ways of perhaps underwriting these costs? And because they're going to continue to grow, given the continual pressure on our streets with increasing traffic and speed and distracted driving, the epidemic of distracted driving we have. And I've talked to the general manager of transportation about a situation I have in one of my schools. It's on Avenue Road, just north of Eglinton, Allenby Public School, where the two crossing guards there have not shown up in the last week. And we can't find anybody to take their place until June. So you can imagine the parents at this school are pretty nervous about not having crossing guards on Avenue Road, where the average speed is about 60, 70 kilometers an hour going north and south. And there had been 3 teachers that were seriously injured and had to retire from teaching because of their injuries, never mind the students. We have put up these metal barriers on the sidewalks on Avenue Road. Well, last week a car ran and jammed through the metal barriers. And so now we had, now the community's asking for more, let's say, concrete type barriers, like a wall, build a wall on Avenue Road so you can walk, the kids can walk to school. So that's what it's become. And then on top of that, we're going to have growing pressure on our residential communities because the province is now going to increase the speed limit on our highways. And I think people forget that we have highways like the 401, 427 running through our communities. So you're going to see cars speeding up Avenue Road, even at a greater intensity, coming off Avenue Road, coming off Yonge Street, coming off Dufferin, coming down Bathurst with all the seniors on Bathurst at Baycrest. So the Bialik School, which is a horrendous traffic problem, is not even a public school, but they have so this is going to be a daunting issue for this council to deal with, the rising cost of providing crossing guards. And I think we're going to have to look at ways of dealing with this growing pressure on our budget, on the communities that are affected by these very, very serious traffic. And I've mentioned before, I've got, my granddaughter goes to Runnymede Public School, one of the best public schools in Canada, but there's 1,200 kids in that school on Runnymede. There's not even any signs or any lights there indicating there's even a school on Runnymede. 1,200 kids every day go back and forth across Runnymede, and cars are speeding up and down Runnymede. The parents are asking for, and I talked to Councillor Perks about it, he's working on it. We're trying to get a traffic a signal on the street. So it's going to be a never-ending challenge. So I think we've got to maybe go forward with this. We don't have any other alternative here. There isn't a quick fix to this. And if you don't pay people, they're not going to show up for these weird shift jobs that are out there. And the public's going to demand more of these crossing guards. So it's not a rosy picture out there when it comes to the crossing guards.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Councillor Minawong.
Are you ready? Okay, I've got 2 motions. The General Manager, Transportation Service, in consultation with the Chief CFO and Treasurer, report directly to Council on the true cost of the Crossing Guard program and transferring the budget from the program from the Toronto Police Service budget to the Toronto Transportation Services budget. The second motion is that General Manager, Transportation Services report directly to City Council on cost-sharing arrangements with the local school boards in providing newer enhanced school crossing guard services. That's partly in response to Councillor Cole's concerns, which I share. I have three comments. Comment number one, this is an important report, and it's a complex report. It has financial implications, it has community-wide implications, and it was dropped on our desks yesterday. And I'm not terribly excited about that. And I think we should have gotten this with the regular agenda. So, Mr. Chair, I leave that with you to deal with. Secondly, when the Toronto Police Transformational Report came out, my first question was, is it, in terms of these changes, the Toronto Police Services was going to save all sorts of money, et cetera, was it going to be neutral? And I was specifically asked about the crossing program and the crossing guard program, and I was constantly reassured, oh yes, it's going to be neutral, it's going to be neutral. It's not neutral. And there's a financial implication to this, and the city of Toronto needs to be made whole. So if we were in some way led down the garden path and it's not neutral, we need to be made whole. That's the reason for my first motion. The second motion is, as Councillor Cole said, and not to repeat, but this is an expensive program. I think that we're going to get continued requests for more crossing guard locations, and our capacity to provide this level of service is going to be continued to be constrained, if not get more constrained, and we have to look at different ways to kind of find ways to pay for this. And one of those ways potentially is to look for local schools and the school boards to be partners with us. We already provide them with a lot of things. It's a big cost for us, and we can't continue to pay those additional costs until still provide the range of municipal services that we already provide.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong. Anyone else to speak?
I'll just, to be just very quick, this is one of those occasions where Councillor Minnan-Wong and I think, are on the same page about ensuring that the full cost of the crossing guard program is realized, and we look at what the real implications were of transferring it over and ensure that it wasn't just a way of, for 1 year, the Toronto Police meeting a budget target by transferring that cost from one division to another. So I'll be supportive of certainly the first recommendation. I'll support the second one because it's about dialogue with the school boards, and we certainly get a lot of requests based on the presence of schools. I'm less convinced that will result in any additional funding given the position the school boards are in, but to enter into a discussion, I see no problem with that.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Councillor McKelvey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank city staff for their work on this file. When I started on December 1st, the first 2 weeks, many phone calls were coming into our office from moms on PTA groups about this program, and those calls have slowed, so thank you. The other is that while crossing guards are a step in the right location, I think we have the Vision Zero coming in as well, and we really need to think about how we can be encouraging our kids to walk to school and using these crossing guards that are there and getting the kids out of the cars. And I've been in front of school zones where you've been able to look down the street and see them, the parent and the kid walk out of the house, get in the car and drive to the school. And so we need to work on driving behavior, and hopefully through implementation of this program, that helps people realize that there are these safety mechanisms in place. Parents will feel more comfortable having their children walk. And while we are building all this infrastructure in Vision Zero, there's just no substitute for the traditional crossing guards. So thank you for your work on this file.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. I would just simply say that I would agree with Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong that we always thought that it was a wash, that it was a program transfer to the city, that it was in the $9 to $10 million range, that it would pretty well stay close to that. But if I'm reading this report correctly, we're going to be looking at a little over $24 million in the coming fiscal year. I guess that's 2020. But at the same time, there's high demand for this program. Parents and schools are asking for it all the time. I think that in a couple of years, this is going to be a $50 million program throughout the city, and I think it is incumbent on us to ask school boards to contribute. At the same time, I pay tribute to some of these crossing guards, to all these crossing guards. It is a very tough shift situation to handle, an hour here, an hour there, an hour at the end of the day. I see them out there on freezing cold days. I see them out in the pouring rain, trying to control kids within a walking zone, drivers who are not paying attention. It is a very tough job, and they're certainly worthy of the increase in pay. At the end of the day, it's going to save lives. It's going to protect kids. It's going to give parents and schools the comfort they need, that their kids can go to and come back from schools safely. So on that, we have two motions. Oh, Councillor Percy, you'd like to speak? Please.
I indicated that, but
I do apologize. You can wrap up.
I'm going to support the motions as well. I'm surprised by this. I'm happy about a couple of things. One, that crossing guards are going to be paid a little more money. That's very good, going from $14 an hour to 16 and change, closer to 17. I think that's a good thing. It would be interesting to take a look at what it actually cost as it relates to the police. So you pay a crossing guard $14 an hour, and then you backstop, when someone doesn't show up with a police officer at I don't know how many dollars an hour, and how that sort of translates across the system in terms of actual monies. But it would be interesting to see. But the thing I guess that I'm worried about here is that we're taking over a program which on the face of it looks like it cost a fraction of what it's going to be costing now. It's an important program, but I'm worried about the difference between what a crossing guard earns all in, with EI, with the employer contributions, with all of those other things, and what a location costs. Even though we do provide, this jacket and a hat and a whistle and a stop sign and possibly boots of sorts, weatherized boots and a raincoat. There's a very, very big difference, and I'm not sure that's not something we can do anything about, because I think we need to take a look at that, because otherwise it's as Chair Pasternak suggests, that in short order this is going to be a 50 plus, 70 plus, 100 plus, $1 million program. As I look on the dots on the map, as crossing guards are deployed citywide, in the suburbs, there are very few dots, proportionally speaking, to the core. And that's not to say that the cross a road out in Scarborough is not any less dangerous than crossing some of the ones downtown, especially given that you have wider roads and higher speeds. So the pressures on all of us are going to continually increase to expand the program and bring in more guards. And we can't do it at these kinds of differentials between what what it's costing us for a person boots on the ground and what we're paying for them for per location. We need to figure out what that difference is and figure out how to bring it much closer in line. Because I don't know, and I should have asked this question of the police. What does it cost us to deploy an officer, a police officer? And what's the difference between what a police officer, earns and what it costs all in to run that program? And it would seem that proportionally speaking, percentage-wise, this is a more expensive program than to run our police services on the ground. And I'm not sure that that's a winning formula. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perusa. So I will move the report recommendations. You guys can get another crack at it at council, but there are two amendments, two motions that are going along with it. The first one is on the screen. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Second one is also on the screen. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. The report as amended, the item as amended, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Now, at the request of Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, we reopened two items, 5.1. So this is being held in your name. Questions for staff?
So I was wondering, oh,
Could be either one. Excuse me? Depending on your question, could be the chief engineer.
explain a little bit about what this, if we award these contracts, this is for just general work over the next 4 years? Is that what we're looking at?
Through the chair, that it's what we call a standalone water main program. As you can appreciate, a huge backlog in Toronto Water in terms of renewal of its aging water main network. What we've decided to do is we looked at a body of work, a ramped-up program, and we felt that working with our colleagues in PMMD that this body of work, relatively low risk from a construction standpoint, lent itself to a strategic sourcing procurement approach, wherein we would go. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful. So, short Reader's Digest version. It's a multi-year contract to the tune of about $20 million a year in construction for 3 years, with a view that ultimately, lessons learned internationally is that if you work with the industry, you are more likely to see more competitive pricing. There's a contractor is committing both manpower as well as equipment to a contract over the longer term, and you're more likely to see efficiencies of scale in that regard. And then ultimately, objective is to reduce unit prices on the value of the construction contracts. So we embarked on that approach. We basically split the city up in its lower risk areas, again from a construction standpoint, in the suburban areas, essentially. North York and Etobicoke in the one service area, and then the other half of North York and Scarborough in the other service area. So we went out to market. Reader's Digest version again, we came up with a bidding process. A low bidder is being awarded the work east of North York and Scarborough. And the other service area, the bid prices came in much higher than what we had expected in terms of a pre-tender estimate on conventional construction. The recommendation for the award of that 3-year contract for the one vendor, when we take a look at their bid prices, it was significantly less than our pre-tender estimate, and so hence our recommendation to award that contract. For the other service area, what we want to do is break out the 2020 program, go out with a separate procurement for the 2020 program, complete the engineering design for the remaining work so that we can actually issue another negotiated request for proposal in the fall to embark on a 3-year contract if all works well.
Drive-by projects that are that sit with no one there, that drive people crazy, because they've started all of them at the same time, and then they, you know, whatever it's convenient for them so that they can save money, they do their projects. But what that means is the road lays open and constricted from traffic because you've bundled a contract. Is that evaluation incorrect, or is?
Through the chair, I think if we take a look at the body of work that is before you in terms of the procurement, it's lower risk in terms of construction activities. We have ensured or prescribed the number of work sites that they could be undertaking at any one time. We pre-qualified the contractors. These are contractors that we felt, based on their submissions, that they had the workforce as well as the equipment to undertake this body of work. So, and the recommended vendor is one who we have experience with and they've adhered to schedules in past work, and so we're pretty confident that the work will be completed in accordance with the schedules that we've laid.
Am I wrong in my kind of assessment that when you bundle contracts, they tend to take a bit longer?
Through the chair, I mean, they take a bit longer in terms of how the work is sequenced and staged, but typically speaking, for the contracts that we've managed, they typically stay within schedule. The issue with water main construction, there's a bit of a wild card as we get into summer conditions when they're having to disinfect the water main, and there could be a protracted period where the water quality results pass, and so we've had
I got
a delay.
20 seconds. And one other question I want to ask is because I looked at the length of these contracts, and they go out till 2023, which is a long time, and sometimes you get, you know, crappy contractors that don't do a very good job, and if you're locked in for till 2023, you're kind of stuck.
Through the chair, so the way that we've handled that, a very good point, is the fact that we enter into a master agreement with a contractor, and every year of work is a separate project agreement. So the next project agreement for the 2020 work is conditional on successful completion of the 2019 work. So
So that means we can deny them projects if,
exactly, if they didn't meet our requirements on the 2019 body of work, they're not awarded contracts for 2020 and 2021.
and can you make that decision administratively, or does that have to come back here if we deny them work?
Through the chair, it's part of the contract terms and conditions, so it's done administratively.
Okay.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong. Any other questions for staff on item 5.1? No. Speakers? Councillor McKelvey, did you want to move this item again? It's moved once again. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Also, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong asked that 5.4 be reopened, which it is. Contract to tender call for rehabilitation of 4 bridges over the Don Valley Parkway. Questions for staff?
So this is all new. When will so one lane will be closed going north and south, starting when and ending when?
Through the chair, subject to committee approval of our recommendation on the contract award today, expectation is the work will begin July 1st and end the end of September.
And there's a stiff penalty if they go after September the 1st, yes?
Through the chair, yes, the stiff penalty is in the order of $30,000 a day for each day that the contractor is delayed.
Okay, so I'm correct. There's one lane that's going to be taken out on each side of the DVP, correct?
Through the chair, that is correct.
And are they going to be working on all the bridges at the same time?
Through the chair, that is correct. That's one of the reasons that, this is a challenging project. We have a tight schedule for 3 months. Our original objective had been to try to get the work done through the summer when we have lower traffic volumes and minimize traffic impacts. I think with committee's approval today, the earliest we can start is July 1st. That's our schedule, and then complete by the end of September.
And will they be, because this is a big deal on the Don Valley Parkway, it's a really big deal. Will they be working during the night?
Through the chair, yes. The contract calls for 24/7 construction. It's the only way that they can adhere to a 3-month schedule. So basically, each bridge is going to require a minimum of 2 crews running 24/7. So it's a huge body of work, manpower, as well as equipment.
The only other question I have is because this is going to have a, notwithstanding that there's less traffic in July and August because people are on vacation, the escape will be to go onto Don Mills Road, and that's the alternative route. Now, right now, Don Mills Road at Eglinton is constrained because of the construction of the LRT. Do you know if by July the 1st, whether all 3 lanes will be open?
Through the chair, looking for our colleagues in transportation. And speaking of,
We have Ashley. So at the intersection of Don Mills and Eglinton, where the crosstown is being constructed, will it open up any lanes as of July 1st? or will there still be traffic restrictions?
Through the chair, so it should be open by July the 1st, yes. We've been assured by CTS that it would be open by then.
All lanes?
That's correct, yes.
So Metrolinx is aware, Crosslinks and Metrolinx are aware of the work that we're getting done, and they understand how important it is that all lanes are going to be open?
Through the chair, yes, absolutely.
And have they written to you and said that, or is it oral represent? This is a big deal. Have they committed to that in writing?
So they certainly have committed to having those lanes open, yes, at that intersection.
In writing?
In writing, yes, Councillor, you'll recall that as part of their work, they need to close the intersection of Leslie and Eglinton. So they're going to do that through July and August, i.e. during the school holidays. So they've committed to enable them to do that intersection at Don Mills would be completely free and open.
All the lane. Can you get me that communication, please, or get it in writing for me?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong. Any other questions for staff? Councillor Cole, would you like to move item 5.4 again? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So I'm going to refer item 7 to the General Manager, Transportation Services. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, Councillor McKelvey, I believe you held 8 down.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I had a couple of questions. So the report covers this agreement, which is dealing with monitoring, and I'm just wondering if they can maybe speak to some of the forecasting. So there's monitoring what's happening in real time, but can they just speak to what's being done in terms of forecasting, looking at, climate change, what should we be expecting for water levels? So right now we're 76 centimeters above normal.
What number?
Niagara Falls, I'm told, is now one contiguous falls. There's no separation between the US or the Canadian falls. There's that much water running through. And that's also 8 million liters per second that is flowing out through Kingston from Lake Ontario. Like it's incredible amount of water. So I was just wondering if staff could speak to what work in addition to this is being done for climate change models and predicting, is this the new normal?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the staff report in front of you and the recommendations 1 and 2 to deal with entering into an agreement with Durham and Peel come out of work that was done by the Source Water Protection Committee for this region. It's a fairly large region, many municipalities. Ourselves, Durham, and Peel are a subset of that, and the agreement and the monitoring system that's proposed here deals with 3 or 4 very key risks that were identified by the Source Water Committee through the course of the last few years. And those risks, basically, risk of a failure of one of the pipelines crossing one of the tributaries, for example, pipelines crossing Highland Creek, or one of our force mains. A break in one of those pipelines would cause a risk. Loss of disinfection of one of the wastewater plants would be a risk, and that was considered also. Or tritium spill from the nuclear plants west of the city. That was the context in which the source water protection worked. Source water protection didn't go beyond that mandate with respect to climate change. There are a lot of other initiatives within Toronto Water that are taking climate change into account, certainly the basement flooding program being one of them. The monitoring that we're currently doing with respect to lake water levels and impact on our infrastructure will at some point result in some recommendations and potentially some modifications to our infrastructure to accommodate that.
And so you mentioned that there's these recommendations. So is there a report that's coming forward that says what these infrastructure needs will be? Like, Where is this being collated? Where is this information being gathered? What, for example, might be that total cost or funding bucket that would be needed to deal with if Lake Ontario water new norm is 75 centimeters above what we previously designed for?
Through the chair, I'll answer that as the GM of water, not the acting DCM. So right now, we do have some buckets of funding within Toronto Water, as mentioned by the director, for basement flooding, and as well wet weather flow control. It would likely be funded out of the wet weather flow basket of goods, because that's dealing with rainwater. What we haven't had to deal with is the impacts of higher lake levels. That really did not become an issue to our infrastructure. It has to properties, but to Toronto Water infrastructure, we noticed that in 2017. We've mitigated some of those impacts this year, and so we've seen a lesser impact, even though lake levels are high. Regardless, there are issues. Down at Eastern Avenue, we're already seeing some flooding because that part of the roadway is below lake level right now. So there will be a need for us to come forward with some capital projects. We'll likely bring it forward through the capital budgeting exercise and be telling council that we'll need to make investments in some infrastructures to deal with high lake levels if that is going to keep happening more frequently. That's still the question we have. Are we going to see these lake levels more frequently? If that is the case, we will have to make some improvements to some of our nearshore infrastructure.
Okay, so we're not there yet, then, it sounds.
No, this report in particular was tied to
Monitoring.
I call it the quality side of the drinking water system. It's tied to source water protection, making sure that we're protecting the quality of our drinking water. What you're talking about is more the quantity, the volume, and the levels. So it wasn't really the focus of this agreement that we have with the other municipalities. But we are looking at the issues you're talking about, and we'll bring it forward as a separate piece.
Okay, great. And there might be a similar agreement looking at quantity of water and flood impacts.
Yeah, that larger discussion we will need to bring in the conservation authorities. We will need to bring in the province and federal jurisdiction as well, because Lake Ontario is a federal body of water. We don't own it, and neither does the province. So if we get into the issues of controlling lake levels, you're dealing with the entities that control the dam, letting water out of each of the lakes. So it becomes very complicated when you're dealing with Lake Ontario. So we would have to bring back other reports and other ideas of how we collaborate.
And then the last question is, I believe the bulk of our waterfront work was done in the 70s. So are we still using that water level as our design criteria, or have we already updated the design criteria?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, we have not updated our design criteria because it has only been within the last 3 years that we've seen these record levels happen. And so that is the concern we have. We've been using the old standard lake level means as the design standards. We have not changed yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. Any other questions for staff? Councillor Perusa?
At what point does that sort of trigger as well some building code changes?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's a very good question, because what we're seeing is the impact to some of the buildings that are constructed very close to the lake, where they have underground parking garages, connections that tie in, and if you have a regular occurrence of lake level rising, we are seeing some of those condo buildings down and commercial buildings down in the core experience flooding in their basements. So that's an issue that we will keep raising. It's not only just building code; it's also planning. Right now, you look at some coastal cities, and do they allow digging of basements that close to the oceans? And typically, they don't. So those are some of the considerations that have to be brought forward as policy decisions and code decisions in future as we get more data.
Correct, because as the lake level rises, the underground table water rises as well, right?
Yes, the two things that happen. You do get that, the raising groundwater table, which then means that the foundation drains collect more water, so there's greater volume that they collect in the buildings. But conversely, the way you design the systems to discharge that water then typically flow from a pump scenario to a gravity flow out. You know, the challenge that we have on Eastern Avenue, as I mentioned, is it flows by gravity back to the lake. Well, right now, the lake is higher than that, so it has nowhere to flow. So as soon as that pipe is full, it ponds back up on land. So you can have the exact same thing occur in buildings if you have the groundwater table rise, as well as the sewer levels rise because you've got the backflow from the lake. Where does the water go from a gravity perspective? It doesn't anymore.
So what triggers what? At what point, like, what's the, what needs to happen first to trigger those other changes?
First thing that would need to be triggered is a discussion by all the parties, and that would, as I explained before, it's complicated with Lake Ontario because that is a body of water. That lake level can be controlled. However, there's implications. You let too much water out, Montreal floods, and shipping channels can't happen because we have too quick a current. So it becomes a complicated exercise saying, oh, what level are we going to take that lake to? And if you change that will be, I believe, the ripple cause back, where if we say we're going to keep the lake level and the new mean will be this, we have to go back and look at what does that mean for all these building designs and our own infrastructure. That is when we would bring forward something as Toronto Water to say, we have an issue here, and you might have to change our policies or our codes. But that bigger discussion has not occurred yet.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Perusa. Any other questions for staff on this item? No? Someone want to move the report? Councillor McKelvey, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Now at item number 9, single-use and takeaway item, consultations and reduction strategy, next steps. This is a staff report update. We have a deputant, Emily Alfred. Great, thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. Is this microphone working? Okay, great. So my name is Emily Alfred. I'm the waste campaigner for the Toronto Environmental Alliance, or T. T has been working with residents, workers, businesses, and City Hall to build a greener city for all for over 30 years. We've heard from our supporters and many more Toronto residents and businesses that they're concerned about waste, about plastic pollution, and want to see our city move towards zero waste and a healthy circular economy. I'm here because we're very excited by the high level of response from Toronto residents and businesses and the strong support for the city to act to reduce single-use takeaway items and plastics. The high turnout at the first phase of public consultation demonstrates just how much Toronto cares. More than 20,000 people responded to the survey, hundreds more participated in events and meetings, and contacting their councillors directly with letters and petitions. The message is clear. Torontonians want the city to show leadership within city facilities and within the city borders. The consultation shows that Torontonians support action that includes mandatory approaches, including bans, fees, or other bylaws, especially for the most difficult and problematic plastics, because regulations work. We can't rely solely on voluntary programs. That's the current system we have. While some businesses are taking action, many are not. Major chains have announced plans to phase out straws or other single-use plastics. Many smaller businesses are switching to reusable or recyclable containers. However, far too many businesses are just not doing their part. Regulations to ban, restrict, or put a fee on materials are tools that level the playing field so all businesses take responsibility for the materials they promote and distribute. That's why governments around the world are taking action. To name just a few, Montreal and Victoria have banned plastic bags. Vancouver is using a range of regulations on a number of single-use and takeout items. Seattle's ban on straws and plastic cutlery started last year. And the European Union confirmed a directive just a few months ago that will ban and restrict 10 single-use plastics in all EU states by 2021. We know that regulations work, and we know that Toronto is ready for them. I also urge you to move quickly on this process and don't allow it to see any further delays. The scale of the plastics crisis requires that all levels of government take action. The federal and provincial governments must pass new laws to hold companies responsible for what they produce and push towards a circular economy. However, Toronto and other cities are on the front line dealing with the consequences, with expensive recycling, increasing levels of contamination, and the cost of litter and environmental cleanup. The city can and should use its powers to reduce plastics within city borders. In addition to looking at regulatory tools, it's also important to remember that the city can act right now. We don't need to wait. The consultation proved that Torontonians want council to show leadership. The city can push ahead and find ways to eliminate unrecyclable materials, reduce single-use items, and even pilot test reusable alternatives in city facilities. Your constituents and residents are the people who are footing the bill for expensive recycling, litter cleanups, and the environmental consequences. This consultation process has and will continue to provide crucial opportunities to hear from them about the future they want for our city. Don't delay this consultation any further and find ways to accelerate it if possible. Don't shy away from bold solutions and regulations to reduce single-use plastics. Toronto is ready for bold action, and we need our politicians to show leadership and respond to that demand.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Questions for staff? Councillor Layton?
Why is this taking so long? You have asked more questions at this committee meeting than I have, Councillor Minnan-Wong. Why is this process taking so painfully long to move forward? I think your microphone's not on.
Okay. Let's get your mic fixed because people who are watching remotely would not be able to hear any of that. You don't think anyone's watching? What are they watching? The View?
Check. There we go. Oh, no, that's fine.
So essentially, just to recap, this is taking a long time because we want to get the consultation right, because that's something we've actually made a mistake on before.
Through you, Mr. Chair of the Council, that's correct.
So you'll be considering regulatory prohibitions in addition to voluntary programs, depending on the item, depending on its usefulness, depending on a number of factors, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
So we haven't ruled any regulatory mechanisms out.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
So the National Zero Waste Council published kind of a white paper on, which was working with industry, was working with municipalities, was working with not-for-profit organizations, came up with a white paper on reducing plastics and some guidelines for it. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And you'll use that in some of your, I just need a confirmation or else you're getting a motion.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Council, we will use that as a basis for some of our recommendations, moving them to Council, yes.
Thank you. There's a communication to this item labeled 5.9.1 from Wentworth Technologies, a Ontario-based company that's actually a major producer of single-use plastics that also talk about sustainable solutions. Have you met with the president and CEO who's written.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, I have not personally met with him.
He's got some really interesting things to say.
And we'd be more than happy to bring him in and part of the consultation.
And these are homegrown technologies. So I asked him one simple question, and maybe I'll form, just as my last question, I'll put this in the form of a question. Would you be surprised to hear that there's no cost difference in producers manufacturing black plastic than any other color of plastic? It's absolutely zero cost difference between them all. So the black plastic that we can't recycle can at no cost to a producer be changed to a plastic that we can recycle. Would you be surprised to hear that?
Somewhat. My understanding through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that the majority of the black plastic that's being used is done for aesthetics purposes instead of the white plastic. But in terms of the cost, if the industry is saying that they can produce it at similar or the same cost, then I'll have to take that.
Great. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 3 questions. So the first is, through your consultation, could you break down how or if and when you involved youth in the consultation, and age groups, numbers, things like that?
We can provide you with specific age demographics of those that have answered the polls, but there was no specific youth engagement. However, there was a significant social media and online presence as well as webcasts. I know that a lot of grassroots organizations also helped spread the message on the online consultations, but we could look at that for phase 2 and specifically targeting youth groups.
And then on that, I guess just the reason I'm asking is there thought to, as you roll out, and if it's about driving behavior, to specifically target youth? So my daughter has this really cool reusable straw. She brings with her everywhere now. Like, I feel like if we want to get action, like, that's a group that's really going to help with reducing as well. So are there thoughts being played to that and implementing it into the strategy?
In actual execution of reduction strategies, that's an option for voluntary measures for sure that we'd love to hear through the second phase of consultations when we present the reduction plan.
Okay. And then my second question is, how or have you had outreach with major food chains that are in the City of Toronto, and what kind of input have they provided into this?
We did have specific consultations dedicated for retailers, food manufacturers, as well as producers of goods. In general, there was support for mandatory and voluntary measures, although we haven't recommended any policies yet. That will be coming forward in phase 2 consultations. So I think in phase 2, we'll get more input from both of those stakeholder groups on their reactions to what's being proposed.
Thank you. And then the third question is, this doesn't specifically, because they're paper, address but coffee cups, although lids are often plastic. So how does that work into this strategy and what you're doing as well?
So through you, Mr. Chair of the Council, the use of single-use coffee cups and the lids is something that was reviewed during the consultation process. And one of the items that we have to be very cognizant of is the equity and accessibility use of those items. And we did hear in some of the feedback that items like straws and lids not be included as part of our review. Again, that will be an area for discussion when we roll this out with phase 2 consultations, but we have to be very cognizant of the equity and concerns that the community has.
And so could part, and I guess this comes into where things have fallen down in the past with legal implications and stuff like that, but could we bring in stuff where it says you have to have the option to allow people to bring their own mug if it's coffee, for example? Like, is that something that would be in our mandate or we would be able to do? Because there's a major chain, I brought my mug in, and I was really annoyed that they told me that's their policy. They would not fill it for me, and I had to take a paper cup.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to the Council, there are health and safety concerns with bringing in your own cup, and to have to defer to legal services to provide their opinion on whether or not we can force businesses to require reusable options to be able to be brought into the establishment.
They're not here?
They are here. Over here, yeah. No, I'm not going to comment specifically on that, but I will say that we are working closely with solid waste and that this is one of the items that they are looking at. And so I think that will be reflected in the report they come forward with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. Any other questions? Councillor, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong. Councillor Gold, did you have questions? I don't know, I see this finger going around. I didn't know what it meant. Well, yeah, now I know. No, I'm pretty sure it was this. I thought you were asking for a second round at first. Okay, we'll get you eventually. Deputy Mayor.
How much does it currently cost to process a ton of recycling products?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, within the basket of goods, it's approximately $170 to $180 per ton. But again, that's dependent on the contamination rate and then also the revenue that's generated on the back end when we sell that material. So it fluctuates.
Oh, what's it now?
So right now, our cost is approximately $180 per ton.
And if it's contaminated?
Pardon me?
If it's contaminated?
If it's contaminated, we have structures within the contract where we pay additional fees based on the percentage of contamination, levels that the material comes in at. So if we exceed certain thresholds, it costs additional funds to process the entire basket of goods that's delivered over the year.
And so what does that look like?
Every percentage point of contamination equates to approximately $500,000 worth of additional expense to the city.
$500,000 based on, now you just switched, I was using tons as a value, as a measure per ton. How much does it cost for a contaminated ton of recyclables?
So it's not based on a contaminated ton. It would be based on that $500,000 would be spread over the approximately 200,000 tons of recyclable materials that are generated. So it's around $2, $2.50 per ton for every percentage point of contamination.
How contaminated is the recyclables that we produced?
Currently, it's pushing around 30% contamination levels.
And would that trigger the $500,000 thing?
Yes.
So we're paying $500,000 extra. So my next question is, is that included in the 180, or is it over and above the 180?
It would be right now in that $180 a ton,
Okay.
that higher contamination.
And how much more would we pay if we included singly these items? What would be the financial impact per ton and then gross?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to take those numbers back and calculate those with my team.
So you don't know how much it would cost yet?
Not for these specific items. This report and the strategy here is to reduce the generation of the material that makes its way into the stream, not to move items from one stream to another.
But there would be so here you say there's no immediate financial implications, but there are financial implications. And is it fair to say that when we use single-use and takeaway items, those would tend to be more contaminated?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, the level of contamination would all depend on how the material is treated by the resident before they throw it out. So if they rinse it and put it in a blue bag or a blue bin, it would be less contaminated than if they just threw it in after use.
So so now I'm going to go to a higher level right now, just generally, because we're kind of on the recycling thing. So fibers, there's a company that Canada Fibers processes all our material, right?
That's correct.
So do they recycle all that stuff on site in Ontario? Or do they send it other places? And if they send it other places, do we go downstream in terms of finding out where they send it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, my understanding is that the vast majority of those materials are processed within the province.
Vast majority.
Yeah, I don't have a specific list of all of the products and places that they go, but my understanding is that the paper and the plastics are processed here, and they are by far the largest volume of materials.
So there was a front page article in the Globe and Mail saying that the recycling products, that a lot of this is shipped to China, and if it's contaminated, it's burned. So my question to you is, can you assure us that we don't ship directly or indirectly any materials overseas to be recycled in another country?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's my understanding that all the plastics that are delivered to CFL to be processed are managed within the province and not shipped to China.
So, this is a little bit off topic, but my last question is with this happening right now, because we're like talking about it right now, what does the market's falling, like is cratering on recycling materials? That's what the article said. And what impact will that have on the cost? Can you give us any visibility into how much increase in price we're going to see when, because of the fall in price in the marketplace?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, last year we had a revenue hit of approximately $8 to $9 million, less revenue that was generated due to the market conditions in China. That was built into this year's budget. Again, that revenue loss over previous years, and we anticipate that to continue unless there are other mechanisms put in place with outlets.
Sorry, just one short question. $8 or $9 million out of how much?
Approximately $18 to $20 million worth of revenue.
That's a big.
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that's generally what the market has seen across Canada, is a 50% drop in sales.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong. Councillor Cole?
Yeah, thank you very much. A couple of questions. Are the single-use cups used by our national chain coffee shops, are they recyclable, or are they plastic? What are they?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, they are not recyclable. No, they would be garbage.
So I know I was in A&W. Yeah, they had a paper straw. Are they recyclable?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, they wouldn't be recyclable, but they could be composted in the compost.
Okay. No, one of my things is that I think we've got to break people of this habit of walking up and down our streets with coffee cups. I think it's really an epidemic of these people wandering our streets with these coffee cups. Can we get them, encourage them to use the Italian model, whereby you cannot get a takeaway plastic cup or whatever it is? You drink your coffee where you buy your coffee. You stand up, you have your coffee, you chat with people, then you go hands-free outside on the street without that in your hand, because that's going to end up, Councillor Prudson knows exactly what I'm talking about. You don't see Italians walking around with plastic cups in Toronto or anywhere. They drink their coffee at home, they drink it at the bar, a coffee bar. Can we do maybe an educational program for millennials, basically, who walk up and down our streets littering with these coffee cups?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we can definitely expand our education and promotion campaign to highlight the fact that you can enjoy your coffee at the establishment in a reusable China cup versus taking
Or bring your own
plastic,
cup,
or
like
bring your
Councillor
own cup.
McKelvey said. I don't know if she does the plastic. I don't think she walks up and down the streets of Scarborough with plastic cups in her hand. But anyway, so maybe do a pilot project trying to wean people off this addiction to these takeaway cups.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's definitely something we can do with our outreach program, for sure.
A constitution, yeah, to everything. And is there any way of rewarding? I know you have, if if you have a smaller, garbage bin, the black one or the gray one, whatever color it is there any, I know it's a reduced price, say, if you get the smaller one?
Yep.
Are there any other incentives we can give people, whether they don't use the, because if you don't use a garbage bin or if you don't use the recycling blue box, the city wouldn't know about it, would they?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the councillor, likely we would know if you didn't have a garbage bin.
No, but I'm saying there are people, I know some of the senior citizens in Ward 8 there, they don't believe in buying canned food. They would never, they certainly, when they shop, they bring their paper bag, their paper sacks, or they bring their cloth sacks. So how would we not perhaps be able to reward them for not using, all these containers and buying plastic cans and metal cans, etc. Is there any incentives we can give people?
Maybe you want to take this offline, go for a cup of coffee in a porcelain cup and talk. It's just, I'm sorry.
Oy vey. Okay, sorry, but I just wanted to reward.
We're getting a little off
people.
track here. No, please, go for coffee.
No, see, Councillor Prusa will help me out on this.
Yeah, I'm going to help him out on this.
Okay.
I'm going to help him out.
Councillor Peruzza, questions for staff? Or do you want to go to speakers? Why don't we go to speakers? Because I think we're wearing out staff. And we're wearing out everyone in the room, and we're wearing out everyone listening remotely. So why don't we go to speakers? Speakers?
Speakers?
Looking at me?
Sure. I just, not because I don't think it, I just want to follow up on that because.
So we're going to speakers.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Because Councillor Coley makes an interesting argument, an interesting point. And I don't really know where it comes from, but we should do some work on it. Because it's not just cultural. I don't think you can go into what they call a bar in Italy, where you buy a cup of coffee, and behind the bar there's plastic cups or styrofoam cups. I don't ever recall a situation like that where you go and get a cappuccino or a latte or an espresso or whatever that is, and you can say at the bar, oh, by the way, put it in a paper cup or a plastic cup because I want to take it away. Doesn't exist. Now, I don't know whether that's because culturally they've refused to do that, or whether it's some kind of a rule. But the notion of walking into a bar and being able to say, by the way, put my cappuccino in a paper cup or a plastic cup because I want to take it away with me, it's a foreign notion. You ask for a cappuccino, they give it to you in a the porcelain cup, and the understanding is that you're going to sit there, sip it there, maybe buy a croissant or a cornetto or something with it, and really enjoy the experience and take in the ambience of the place. It's actually quite interesting, and it's a bit of a phenomenon. But here, for some reason, it's like everybody, whether it's Tim Hortons or Starbucks or whoever it is, it's like 5 or 6 different layers of cups, even downstairs for that matter, right? Different sizes, and we've really done that to ourselves, and I don't know how one does away with it, whether it's by bringing in rules or incentive programs, but it would need a big change, and I don't think it's something that would happen. But it would be interesting to actually figure out what some of those answers are to some of those to some of that.
Thank you.
And I thought I'd just contribute that for Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Peruzza. Councillor Cole.
Yeah, no, I know I was trying to be somewhat humorous with that, but I was just using an example of how we've got to change our mindset. And I know that at home, my wife now won't let me in the door if I go shopping at Lady York or No Frills, whatever it is. I can't come back with plastic bags. Impossible. So I've now changed. I bring my cloth bags, reusable bags, shop, and then come in the door because there's no more plastic bags for me. So we all need to be made more aware of the role that individuals play in this, in our habits. And I think many people would be part of, reducing single-use plastic or whatever, if we got into their sort of consciousness and not in a draconian way, not with rules, not with fines. It's just a way of educating, sensitizing people to some of the habits we have. And I think some of those habits we could break. It was more political. Like as I gave the example of the plastic bag, we could break that habit, but we don't do it unless we're sensitized by educational programs, by public relations programs that can be done. And I know I use the example of the takeaway cups. And that is a real addiction that we have here in North America, the takeaway cup. And I can imagine the cost of dealing with those by, I don't know how many millions there must be every day that people walk away. So I don't think there's any harm in trying to sensitize people, educate people, whether it be the plastic coffee cups or plastic bags, and people will come on side. And also to reward people who change their habits. And I don't think we have enough rewards. I know there's a lot of Torontonians who are extremely conscientious about everything they do. And I just talk about, people in my neighborhood, in my ward, they are really starting to say, well, right, I want to change, and tell me more about it, and they'll do it. And I just think that we have an opportunity without spending a whole amount of money or huge campaigns, just trying to look for those, and I know a lot of the NGOs do this kind of work, but there's great opportunity to get people on side, and that's how we start to change, I think, attitudes, and then we end up saving a lot of money and we save the planet. But unless we start to sensitize people in a friendly way, in a positive way, not, as I said, not in a punitive way, and that's why I think it would be fun to do this Italian cup campaign, let's, and it tastes awful. I don't know how you could drink that stuff with the plastic, the styrofoam. Yeah, I almost spit out the cappuccino if I have it in that stuff. I can't ingest it. So anyways, that's what my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cole. I would agree drinking out of styrofoam is problematic. Are there any other speakers on this item? Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you. I'll speak really briefly, just because we're going to have a long time. We're going to have a long opportunity to consider the various proposals that come forward. Unfortunately, it's just going to be about almost a year from now. And just to put a calendar or a timeline to this, it was like 6 years ago that we entered into an attempt at a plastic bag ban that perhaps was ill-advised. One of those. I would argue that maybe we've reached a different point in this, and I'll give Jennifer credit for this trashy society that may be more reflective of our use of throwaway single-use items than those societies that Councillor Perruzza and Councillor Cole were talking about. But there seems to be a sense of urgency around plastics that has grown since that time, but it has been a couple of years, and even since we gave direction to solid waste management to move on this, it just seems we're being a bit timid. I appreciate that we need to do consultation on the matter, but another year just puts us another year behind, and another probably several hundred tons of plastic ending up in landfill that doesn't need to be. Though, for one, it's not bans that I'm looking for. Like, that's not the only thing I think that many of us expect from this. There will be a time for prohibitions and to regulate industry to change their practice that might just change the type of plastic they're using so it's more compatible with our municipal system, with other municipal systems. There are times when fees may be appropriate. like the feed that the City of Toronto had for years and seemed to work. I certainly saw more people over the course of time that used reusable bags rather than getting bags from stores. There may be some that involve education and only education, because we know that education of young people, of youth, works. Much of our recycling, our Blue Bin program, depended on that. I know because that was the generation that had to go home and police their parents about what to put in what bin. And there's often people say, you need a degree to learn what goes in the Blue Bin. No, you don't. You need a 7-year-old. You need a 7-year-old that's gone to school that knows exactly what can go in that Blue Bin and what goes in the green bin, because they're taught that and they take the time and care. And there might be incentives. Like, lastly, there might be incentives that are involved to try to give people an encouragement to not use those items. All of this, though, has been workshopped to death by the National Zero Waste Council that we're a member of. I don't think the City of Toronto is a member of their plastics advisory panel. We're a member of the food advisory panel. I sit on it with members of solid waste management. But their plastic advisory panel, I sent a version to the chair. I also sent it to the clerks to circulate on this in the next item. That includes, they include industry, they include municipalities, they include the regulatory authority, the provinces, and they've gone through and identified different approaches for different types of plastic. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. And I'm happy to hear that staff have seen this. I hope that they take it to heart in order to move it forward a little quickly. And it's not that these are foreign or future technologies. I met with a lobbyist from Wentworth Technologies, this company based out of Bradford, and with operations in the U.S. and Europe, and had some very practical advice about how we could accomplish this that would reduce the amount of plastic ending up in landfill. That would reduce the amount of plastic that we use. So I think it's really important for us to find those private sector partners that aren't afraid of change. Because too often we sit here, people come in and saying, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. The fact is other jurisdictions are doing it and they're seeing good results. So let's first not be afraid of involving the private sector in the discussion, but also not afraid to push them in order to identify those that are willing to go along a path with us that involves a less plastic, less throwaway future, so that we can have the society that Councillor Perruzza and Cole talk about, where we have more time to enjoy the things that are in our cups rather than trying to figure out which bin the cup needs to go in.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Any other speakers? Okay, I'm going to move adoption of the report before us. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Now on to item 10, management of solid waste contracts under transition to full extended producer responsibility model. Questions for staff? Speakers, I understand Councillor Layton has a motion.
Yes, thank you very much. For those of us that read first of all, I'd like to thank staff for this report back. I think it was brought to the floor of the committee last month, and I think by providing staff the opportunity to give feedback, I think the recommendations in the confidential report which I will move, are very helpful in our dialogue with our contractor. I would like to move the following motion: that City Council direct the City Manager to formally request that the Minister of the Environment provide an update on the future of the extended producer responsibility transition for the Blue Box program, as the delay is costing the city in outdated contract costs. I just wanted to apparently we've asked this on a staff-to-staff sort of level, but we need to make it very clear that these delays are not helpful, and in fact may be costing the city money. Because in this time of uncertainty, we don't know what to do. We put out a new contract that then we sign and then have to turn around and change the parameters for, or have costly provisions to break or to change, Or do we just continue on our existing contract that might not get us the best price? Both those things involve us paying more. So it's important for us to realize that, and important for the provincial government to realize that their delay is costing this city of Toronto money, because there's a lot of stuff in the news in the last little bit about, oh, it's the city that's just spending money faster than they collect it. But in fact, it's not, and in this respect, it's the province that are directly costing us more money by not moving on their transition to the new Blue Box program, where they have on other items, as we see in the report. So I'm just hoping we can tell the minister that we'd like an update and that this is important to our bottom line.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Any questions for the mover? Any further speakers on the item? No? Okay. The motion is on the screen. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. The item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item number 11, Disco Road Organics Processing Facility Future Operations and Maintenance Agreement Amendment. Councillor Layton, you held the item.
So I held it because I had planned on putting a motion forward to discuss the ability of bringing it in-house after this contract was up. That's like a decade away, so maybe we'll leave that one for another day.
Oh, well, that's good news. Any other speakers on the item? Councillor Layton, would you like to move the recommendations?
Sure.
All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item number 12, this is one of the walk-on items. Sanofi Pasteur Ravine Stewardship Initiative. We have a deputant, Paul Scrivener. Thank you very much for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning, councillors, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of Sanofi. And we support the content of Councillor Pasternak's memo to you, and certainly support the motion that is at the bottom of the document. And we thank the councillor very much for his leadership in this matter. As you know, the ravines are part of our DNA of the city. There's 11,000 hectares of ravine lands. We all live within 1 kilometer of a ravine, and the ravines are under pressure from a number of things: erosion, human traffic, invasive species, Norwegian maples, Norway maples, dog strangling vine, and so on. And the ravines are changing. Very few of them are in their pristine state. Sanofi, and it's a big job. The city recognizes very well through its ravine strategy that the ravines need help, but it's where to find the resource to do this. And I'm delighted to say that Sanofi wants to be a pioneer here and be the first to take on a portion of ravine from Steeles Avenue down to the G. Ross Lord Dam and steward it, look after it, and help achieve the kinds of things the city wants to do in its ravines program. I should just give you a thumbnail about the company. Sanofi has been there at its location at its Dufferin and Steeles for 100 years. It manufactures vaccines for sale around the world. It's currently investing $500 million in constructing a new facility, and it has a very strong green ethic in its operations. In stewarding, Sanofi is prepared to make a 5-year commitment to look after the ravine. This would be done on a scientific basis. We would use probably University of Toronto Faculty of Forestry to help with this, and they have a demonstrated expertise in ravine study and management. And Sanofi would employ professional outside resources to help with this work. Importantly, Sanofi wants to engage citizens in this, and it has a good working relationship with local ratepayer organizations. Schools could be involved and so on in seed planting programs. And it's important that citizens be engaged because we all need to know how important the ravines are, and you know, the best way to do this is to teach in schools and get people out on weekends helping to remove invasives, clean up garbage, and so on. To do this, we would very much appreciate your support and council support because it is a new project, a new initiative, and it's going to, since it is the first, it's going to have its challenges. And have council's endorsement so that we work with staff would be a good thing. And we also have to work with the TRCA on this because they really do control the ravine lands. But we think this can happen. And it's an exciting project. It's not going to cost the city anything. And we hope that this opens the door for many other projects of this nature. Thank you. That's my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Great. Well, thank you, Paul, for coming, and thank you for bringing this idea forward. Just very quickly, since 2010, I guess Sanofi has had an environmental program called Planet Mobilization. And I'm assuming that taking stewardship or partnering with community stakeholders on some of the West Don River Valley properties, it harmonizes with that program.
Yes, Councillor, that's correct. And the program involves reduction of the things that the Sanofi's campus would use, like water and electricity and so on, managing greenhouse gases. Sanofi last year engaged U of T Forestry to do an inventory of all the trees on their site and to develop a plan to manage those and also restore some vegetation. And yes, Sanofi believes very strongly in engaging local groups, and we will be reaching out to the Ridgegate community.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Cole?
Yes, thank you very much, Paul, for bringing this forward, this exciting partnership here. Does Sanofi engage in this type of stewardship partnership in any other countries or jurisdictions that you know of?
I believe this is a first for the company.
Because their head office is where, Switzerland or?
No, in Paris.
Paris, for France, yeah. Okay, and in terms of, in this stewardship initiative that's being proposed here, would they undertake to do an inventory of, for instance, invasive species to make sure we have a benchmark going forward?
Councillor, that's a very good question, and I should have provided maybe more detail in terms of a sustainability plan, but one of the things you have to do is very scientifically inventory what is there. You have to look at soil quality, then you have to look at the issues that may be existing, like erosion and invasive species and so on, the health of the existing trees and other vegetation. Because if you don't do that, you can't really develop an intelligent plan going forward. It has to be very scientifically based so that everything you do has a reason for it. It's not just, well, we think we should do this and do that. And to remove invasives and so on. That takes a lot. It takes study, and you have to know exactly what you're doing and what you're going to do in terms of remediating. And once you start this program, it's important that it be maintained. And so that's why Sanofi's prepared to do the 5-year window.
Because I guess right now, we have no idea how many Norwegians are in our ravines, do we?
Depends upon the ravines. Inner-city ravines, there are a lot more because they arrive there first. I hate to pick on nationalities, but so
the trees. Norwegian.
But that'll be all part of the inventorying process.
Yes. Anyways, thank you very much for coming today with this exciting proposal here.
You're welcome.
Councillor McKelvey?
No question for staff.
Questions for staff? Okay. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Okay, great. Councillor McKelvey, questions for staff?
My question to staff is, when will we see the next report on the ravine strategy?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So that ravine strategy, implementation strategy, is planned to be presented in front of council this September. This fall.
Question for staff, Councillor Cole?
Yes, in terms of this offer from Sanofi Pasteur, would it be compatible in terms of the work that the ongoing ravine strategy work that's being done by our Parks Department and Conservation Authority? Could you see this as a potential support and beneficial to what the city is doing, to have this kind of partnership?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the motion in front of us is to look at the feasibility, and I think that's great. We can do that. We can look at the feasibility. A lot of the proposals are in line with what we're doing or what we're presenting, and how we actually engage in that implementation would be, I guess, subject to how the partnership would work and who would do what and what would the magnitude be. But again, the motion in front of us is fantastic. There's a group of people that are very interested in participating in helping manage the ravines. I'd like to have those conversations.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to add to that, it is actually one of the guiding principles in the ravine strategy was to look for partnership. There was a lot of people and a lot of consultation that occurred when the strategy was developed. And we heard loud and clear that there's all kinds of partnerships. A lot of people want to work with the city. What we need is the framework. How do we engage? How do we do it? How do we engage private sector entities as well as community groups?
So this could be a template for developing this framework of partnerships.
That would help, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Any speakers? Councillor Cole.
Yeah, no, this is, very welcoming and exciting because it's obvious that the task before the city and the Conservation Authority is enormous. We just we're fortunate to have 20% of our landmass almost is ravines. I mean, that's an incredible benefit, as there are natural sewers, as our deputy city manager knows. And without them, the flooding would just be incredible in the city if we didn't have those natural sewers, our ravines, and not to mention the havens they are for wildlife and native species. So this initiative, on behalf of a very world-renowned company that is based in your ward, right, Councillor?
Yes.
Yes, so even more renowned then. So anyways, I think this is potentially a great model going forward, and getting people to adopt, to engage, to support, because the city, our government officials cannot sustain the ravines by themselves. They're just too enormous a task. I mean, the inventory that's required, the identification, and never mind the removal, the replanting of native species. I'm sure Councillor Prutz has no idea how many Norwegian maples he's got in his ward. Neither do I. You've got a pretty green ward, I think, up there. But anyways, so each councillor should have maybe an inventory of how many invasive species they've got in their wards and know which ones are the most dangerous, where's the dog strangling vines or whatever. We should know that. We don't know that right now. So you could be overrun with Norwegians in your ward. You wouldn't know about it. Anyway, so I fully support this initiative.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cole. Any other speakers on the item? Well, obviously, I wouldn't have brought it here if I didn't support it. I think it's a great idea to bring in the corporate sector, to bring in community partners. We've seen it work very well throughout the city. I think Friends of the Dawn has been a very successful model for helping maintain the Dawn. And Councillor Cole is correct. The responsibility and stewardship of our ravines is way beyond the resources of our Parks Department, of TRCA, and we need community partners to come in. Sanofi Pasteur has a stellar record in being a good community partner worldwide, and I believe that working with staff, they can come back with some good ideas. At the beginning of this term, I went to the mayor's office. I said, ravines are the new frontier in this city. We've got to spend this term focusing on ravines, and I was so excited to hear Councillor McKelvey and Councillor Cole also agree with that. It's a vast piece of geography, but it's a wonderful piece. The philosophy should be enjoy but protect, and certainly I believe that what's before us can help us meet that philosophy, enjoy and protect. Yes, Councillor Perusa.
I think this is a great initiative, by the way. The ravines are absolutely magnificent, but they're under enormous pressure, enormous threat. Not just when it floods and for example, the waters, wash up all the plastics and all the other junk that they sort of, bring down into the ravine system, but they're a source of dumping for a lot of people, and they're really being strangled. They're being choked, and they're such a treasure. Not just from the problem isn't just invasive species that are growing rampant everywhere, but really what we're doing to them. So, and as you say, they're way beyond the city's ability to deal with them in a significant way. So these partnerships with the private sector and with communities, I think that there are a lot of people out there willing to help in this regard and willing to work with us in maintaining the sort of the health and vitality of the ravine system. So an initiative like this is wonderful to see, and hopefully it'll be an example to others to follow suit and really give us a hand in revitalizing one of our gems, one of our treasures, and that's our ravine system for sure.
Thank you, Councillor Perusa. I guess we can vote on the motion. Whether we want to put it on the screen or everyone has it in front of them.
Let's record that one, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry?
Let's record it.
Yes, okay. All those in favor of adopting the recommendation? Councillor Cole, Councillor McKelvey, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Wong, Councillor Perusa. Opposed? There's no one opposed. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Last item today is closure of Don Valley Parkway ramps at Eglinton Avenue East. This is Deputy Mayor Min Wong's item. Question for staff, or you've written it such.
So staff drafted this one, I just looked at it and said June 20th, December 31st, which I think is a tad long. So I might be amending it at council to shorten that up, because I don't think to close off the ramps for that long would, I'm not saying they will, but I'm saying that if you give them too much time, they'll use too much time.
We'll be glad to talk to you before council, before the report goes forward, and discuss that with you.
Okay, thanks. So I'll move approval.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried.
Are we done?
I believe that completes our business for today. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Enjoy the rest of the day. We are adjourned.
Well, this part's recyclable.
Quick interview?
It was a tea. It wasn't an espresso, it was a tea.
I've got the,
doing?
City TV. Do you get a second to talk about the cycling guidelines booklet?
Yeah, what?
Just looking at, the reasoning behind it, there's some interesting things. Like looking at, a lot of it about these mixed, not, wanting to watch cyclists with pedestrians, and the reason why we're moving forward with the cyclist guidelines. So just kind of paint a picture behind the thought process.
So you have some concerns with it?
No concerns. Just questions with City TV, just to do a quick interview.
Oh, I see. Look, if they were interviewing me now,